The crystal towers of Kalos Prime were dying. Once they had reached toward the sky like frozen music, their surfaces glowing with soft blue light that danced through the city streets. Now they cracked and crumbled as toxic rain ate through their walls. The beautiful singing they once made in the wind had become a low, painful moan. Kira pressed her translucent fingers against the observation window of the orbital station. Below her, the world she had known since birth was turning into something from a nightmare. The forests that used to glow with gentle bioluminescent light were now twisted black shapes. The rivers that once flowed like liquid silver had turned a sickly green color that burned anything it touched. Her world was ending, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "The atmospheric readings are getting worse," said Doro from his workstation. The old scientist's voice was heavy with exhaustion. He had not slept properly in weeks, spending every waking moment trying to understand what was killing their planet. His usually bright yellow skin had faded to a pale cream color, a sign of deep stress among the Villani people. Kira turned away from the window and walked across the station's main communication center. The room was filled with screens showing data from all across Kalos Prime. Every screen told the same terrible story. The air was becoming poison. The water was turning to acid. The soil was dying. Their beautiful world was becoming a place where nothing could live. "How much time do we have left?" asked Commander Binu. The military officer stood tall despite the bad news, his broad shoulders straight and his voice steady. But Kira could see the fear in his large dark eyes. Fear for his people, fear for his family, fear for everything they had built over thousands of years. Doro looked at his instruments and shook his head slowly. "At the current rate of decay, we have perhaps 6 months before the atmosphere becomes completely toxic to our people. Maybe less if the storms continue to get stronger. 6 months. Kira felt something cold settle in her stomach. 6 months to save 2 million people. 6 months to find a way to leave the only world they had ever known. 6 months to somehow find sanctuary among the stars. The Villani had always been a peaceful people. They solved problems by talking, by finding ways for everyone to benefit, by working together in harmony. Their science was based on understanding natural balance and living in peace with their environment. They had never needed to fight wars or build weapons of destruction. They had never thought they would need to evacuate their entire civilization. "We need to send the distress signal," Binu said quietly. "We cannot save ourselves alone." Kira nodded and began working at her communication console. Her job was to reach out to other worlds, to make contact with the great civilizations that existed among the stars. She had done this work for many years, sending peaceful messages of greeting and friendship to distant peoples. Now she would be sending a cry for help. She began to compose the message, choosing her words carefully. In Galactic Standard, the language used by most space-traveling civilizations, she wrote about their situation. She explained that Kalos Prime was dying and that her people needed help to evacuate. She told them about the 2 million Villani who would die if they could not find new homes. The message went out across 17 different star systems. It traveled through space at the speed of light, carrying their desperate plea to anyone who might listen. All they could do now was wait and hope that someone would answer. The first responses began to arrive within days. The Helix Confederation sent a formal message expressing their deep sadness about the situation on Kalos Prime. They offered to send observers to study the environmental collapse, but they could not provide ships for evacuation. Their own worlds were too far away, and their vessels were not designed for such large-scale rescue operations. The Zenth Empire responded, with detailed scientific papers about atmospheric decay and suggestions for slowing the process. Their message was very long and full of complex theories, but it offered no practical help. They explained that their society was not equipped to handle refugees and that their worlds could not support Villani biology. The Crystalline Assembly sent philosophical writings about accepting fate and finding peace in the cycle of life and death. They wrote beautiful poetry about the natural order of things and how civilizations, like individual beings, must eventually come to an end. Kira found their words elegant but useless. Day after day, more responses came. Every major civilization in their region of the galaxy sent messages. They all expressed sympathy. They all offered advice or study opportunities or prayers to their various gods. But none of them offered ships. None of them offered sanctuary. None of them were willing to actually help save the Villani people. "They see us as already dead," Binu said bitterly as they read another polite refusal. They think our situation is unfortunate but not their responsibility. Doro looked up from his environmental monitors with tears in his large eyes. The storm systems are accelerating. We may have less time than I thought. Perhaps 4 months, not 6. Kira felt despair settling over her like a heavy blanket. She had spent her entire career believing that the civilized peoples of the galaxy would help each other in times of crisis. She had thought that advanced societies would naturally want to preserve life and prevent extinction. But now she was learning that being civilized and being caring were not the same thing. She continued to send messages, reaching out to more distant civilizations, hoping to find someone who would offer real help instead of empty words. Her communications array worked day and night, broadcasting their plea across an ever-widening circle of space. Then, 3 weeks after the first distress signal, something unexpected happened. A transmission came from a sector of space that was not in any of their star charts. The signal was weak and took several hours to decode properly. When Kira finally managed to translate it into galactic standard, she stared at the words in confusion. The message was simple and written in broken, awkward galactic standard that suggested the senders were not native speakers. It said only "message received. Understand situation. We come, hold position. Bringing ships." There was no identification, no formal greeting, no explanation of who was sending the message. Just those few simple words promising help from complete strangers. Kira called Doro and Binu to look at the transmission. They studied it for a long time, trying to understand where it had come from and who might have sent it. The signal originated from coordinates that show no registered civilizations, Doro said, checking their galactic databases. Whoever sent this comes from unexplored space. Could it be a trap? Binu asked, his military instincts making him suspicious. Kira shook her head. What would be the point? We have nothing left to steal. Our world is dying, and soon we will have nothing of value to anyone. They decided to respond to the mysterious message, asking for more information about who was coming to help them. But they received no reply. Whoever these strangers were, they were not interested in long conversations. They had heard the distress call and they were coming. That was all they needed to say. As the days passed and no other offers of real help arrived from the known civilizations, Kira found herself watching the stars and wondering who was out there in the darkness, traveling through space to help people they had never met. She wondered what kind of beings would risk themselves for strangers when the great and civilized peoples of the galaxy would not. Soon, she thought, they would find out. 5 days after the mysterious message, space around Kalos Prime began to shimmer. Kira was monitoring the long-range sensors when she saw the first signs of approaching ships. What appeared on her screens made her call out in alarm. "Commander Binu! Doro, you need to see this!" The two males rushed to her station and looked at the sensor readings. What they saw defied their understanding of how civilized beings should travel through space. The approaching fleet looked nothing like the elegant vessels of known galactic civilizations. These ships were angular and scarred, built like weapons rather than peaceful transports. Their hulls showed signs of countless repairs and modifications. They moved in tight military formations that spoke of constant preparation for battle. Everything about them suggested a people who lived with violence and danger as daily companions. "How many ships?" Binu asked, his voice tight with worry. 12 vessels of various sizes, Kira reported, watching the readings with growing concern. The largest one is broadcasting an identification signal. It calls itself the Earth Defense Ship Teguk. Doro was already working at his research console, searching their databases for information about these newcomers. What he found made his skin turn an even paler shade of cream. "Earth," he said slowly, his voice filled with horror. "I found their homeworld in our xenobiology database. It is classified as a Class 12 death world." Kira and Binu stared at him. Class 12 was the highest danger rating in the galactic classification system. It meant a world so hostile that most known species would die within hours of exposure to its environment. "What kind of conditions does it have?" Kira asked, though she was not sure she wanted to know the answer. Doro read from the database with growing disbelief. Crushing gravity 3 times standard. Violent weather systems that can destroy cities. Aggressive fauna that hunts other species for food. Extreme temperature variations. Atmospheric composition that is toxic to most life forms. Frequent seismic activity and volcanic eruptions. And intelligent life evolved there. Binu said, his military training making him think of these newcomers as potential threats. According to this, humans are persistence predators, Doro continued reading. They evolved to chase their prey across vast distances until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. Their entire biology is designed for surviving conditions that would kill us quickly. The lead ship was now close enough for direct communication. A transmission came through on standard frequencies, and Kira accepted the connection with trembling fingers. "This is Captain Hyon Park of the Earth defense ship Teguk," came a voice speaking in rough but understandable galactic standard. "We received your distress signal. Request permission to approach and assess your situation." The voice was unlike anything Kira had heard before. It was direct and efficient, without the flowery diplomatic language that civilized species used. There were no elaborate greetings or cultural pleasantries, just practical words focused on getting things done. "This is Kalos Prime Orbital Station," Kira replied, trying to keep her voice steady. We welcome your assistance." "Understood. Sending survey teams to evaluate environmental conditions and population distribution. We'll coordinate with your people to establish evacuation procedures." Evacuation procedures. The humans spoke of moving 2 million people across interstellar space as if it were a routine operation. As if saving an entire civilization was something they did regularly. "Captain Park," Binu said, taking over the communication, "we should inform you that our planet's atmosphere is extremely toxic. The surface conditions are dangerous even for our own people." There was a pause, and then Captain Park responded in a tone that surprised them all. "Understood. We have experience with hostile environments. This appears to be within acceptable parameters for our operations." Acceptable parameters. Kira looked at her instruments showing the acid rain and poison storms raging across their dying world. To the humans, this environmental disaster was merely acceptable parameters. "We are sending down advanced teams to establish contact and begin survey operations," Captain Park continued. "Teams will consist of environmental specialists and evacuation coordinators. Please provide coordinates for your population centers." As Kira transmitted the requested information, Binu was studying the human fleet through their telescopic sensors. What he saw concerned him greatly. These were clearly military vessels designed for war and built to survive in combat. The largest ship showed weapon emplacements that could level cities. Why would a military fleet respond to a civilian distress call? He wondered aloud. Doro had been researching human history in their databases. What he found painted a picture of a species that had survived countless disasters on their own world. According to their records, humans have experienced multiple extinction-level events on their planet. Massive climate changes, asteroid impacts, volcanic catastrophes. They survived all of them. But why come here? Kira asked. "What do they gain from helping us?" Before anyone could answer, Captain Park's voice came through the communication system again. "Kalos Prime Station. We have completed our initial scans of your planet. Confirmed environmental collapse in progress. Estimated time before complete atmospheric failure is approximately 4 months. 4 months. Even less time than Doro had calculated. Kira felt her hope fading further. "We understand the urgency of your situation," Captain Park continued. "Human Rescue Fleet is equipped for emergency evacuation operations. We have experience relocating populations from failing worlds. Human Rescue Fleet." These words made Kira pause. She had assumed these were military conquerors coming to take advantage of their weakness. But they called themselves a rescue fleet. "Captain Park," she said carefully, "may I ask why you responded to our distress call when other civilizations did not?" Another pause. When the human captain spoke again, his voice carried a weight of experience that spoke of hardships survived and battles won. "Because we know what it means to face extinction," he said simply. "We know what it means to have nowhere else to go. And we know that sometimes help comes from places you do not expect." Over the next several hours, more human ships arrived. Each one was as scarred and battle-ready as the first. But each one also carried equipment for rescue operations. Kira watched in amazement as they deployed sensor networks to map population centers and began calculating evacuation. Logistics. The humans worked with mechanical efficiency that impressed even Binu. They did not waste time on ceremony or protocol. They identified problems and solved them. They saw obstacles and overcame them. They approached the impossible task of saving an entire civilization as if it were simply another job to be completed. "I have been wrong about them," Doro admitted as he watched the human fleet organize itself around their dying world. I thought they were coming as conquerors, but they move like protectors. As night fell over the orbital station, Kira found herself staring out at the human ships positioned between Kalos Prime and the radiation storm that was contributing to their planet's death. The vessels had arranged themselves in a defensive formation, not to attack but to shield. These Death World natives, these persistence predators from a planet of nightmares, had traveled across the galaxy to stand between the Vellani people and extinction. They had come not as conquerors or saviors, but as fellow survivors who understood what it meant to fight for every day of existence. Tomorrow, Kira thought, they would learn what kind of people chose to make impossible rescues their mission in life. The first human shuttle descended through Kalos Prime's toxic atmosphere like a falling star. Kira watched from the orbital station as it cut through the poisonous storm clouds that surrounded their dying world. Any normal spacecraft would have been dissolved by the acid rain and torn apart by the violent winds, but the human vessel continued its descent without any sign of distress. The atmospheric conditions down there would kill most species within minutes, Doro said, monitoring the shuttle's progress with disbelief. How are they surviving it? Commander Binu studied the readings from their sensors. Their ship is not even showing signs of hull damage. What are these humans made of? The shuttle landed in the ruins of their capital city during one of the worst toxic storms they had recorded. The rain falling there was so acidic it could eat through metal in hours. The wind carried particles that would burn the lungs of anyone who breathed them. Yet the human craft settled gently in the courtyard of the old council chambers as if it were landing on a peaceful world. Kira had volunteered to meet with the human survey team, despite the dangerous conditions. She wore the best environmental suit their technology could provide, but she knew it would only protect her for a limited time. The three Vellani who accompanied her were equally nervous as they made their way through the ruins of their once beautiful city. The council chambers had been magnificent once, with walls of living crystal that sang in harmony with the wind. Now they were cracked and darkened, their music replaced by the howling of the toxic storm outside. The Vellani delegation waited in the emergency shelter, watching their instruments track the approaching humans. The airlock opened, and the first human stepped inside. Lieutenant Yuna Ko was shorter than Kira had expected, but she moved with a fluid precision that spoke of complete confidence in dangerous environments. Her environmental suit looked more like battle armor than scientific equipment, covered with sensors and tools that Kira did not recognize. Behind her came Sergeant Taeho Shin, carrying communication equipment that somehow maintained perfect signal strength despite the electromagnetic chaos outside. "Thank you for meeting with us under these conditions," Lieutenant Ko said in her direct, efficient manner of speaking. "We understand this environment is hazardous for your people." "We apologize for the dangerous conditions," Kira replied, still amazed that the humans had made the journey at all. "The atmospheric toxicity has reached extreme levels." Lieutenant Ko checked one of her instruments and looked up with what Kira thought might be amusement. "Actually, this is relatively mild for our operations. It reminds me of spring storm season back home." She showed them readings from Earth's weather systems that made everyone in the room fall silent. The spring storms on the human homeworld were more violent and toxic than the environmental collapse that was destroying Kalos Prime. What the Vellani considered an extinction-level catastrophe, the humans saw as mildly unpleasant weather. "Your homeworld experiences conditions like this regularly?" Doro asked in a stunned voice. "Worse, usually," Sergeant Shin replied matter-of-factly as he set up his equipment. "Earth has some challenging weather patterns, but you adapt to what you grow up with." The humans worked with mechanical efficiency while they talked, setting up instruments to analyze the atmospheric conditions and establishing communication links with their ships in orbit. They moved like a perfectly coordinated team, each person knowing exactly what needed to be done without lengthy discussions or debates. "We need to catalog your population centers and evaluate transportation requirements," Lieutenant Ko said, activating a holographic display that showed detailed maps of Kalos Prime. "How many people are we looking at for full evacuation?" "Approximately 2 million individuals," Commander Binu replied. "But we understand this may be beyond the scope of what any rescue operation could handle." Lieutenant Ko and Sergeant Shin exchanged glances that Kira could not interpret. Then Lieutenant Ko nodded and began marking locations on her map display. 2 million is definitely challenging," she said in the same tone someone might use to discuss a difficult but manageable work assignment. We will need to bring in additional transport capacity and establish multiple evacuation zones. But it is within our operational parameters. Within their operational parameters. These humans spoke of moving entire civilizations across interstellar space as if it were routine logistics rather than an impossible miracle. Lieutenant Ko, Kira said hesitantly, may I ask how many people your rescue operations have moved before? Our largest single operation relocated 4.7 million people from the Kepler 442 colony when their star became unstable, she replied while continuing to work with her instruments. That took 6 months. This should be faster since we are not dealing with stellar radiation as a primary threat. Nearly 5 million people. The humans had saved nearly 5 million people in a single operation, and they spoke of it as if it were just another day at work. Kira began to understand that humanity approached problems differently than any other species she had encountered. Doro was studying the human equipment with fascination. Your technology is quite different from what we are familiar with. It appears to be designed for extremely harsh conditions. Human engineering prioritizes functionality over elegance, Sergeant Shin explained. Our equipment has to work in environments that would destroy most technology. We build things to survive, not to look pretty. This was becoming clear to the Villani delegation, where their own technology was graceful and harmonious, designed to work with natural forces. Human technology seemed built to overcome any obstacle through superior durability and raw power. Their ships were not beautiful, but they were incredibly tough. Their plans were not elegant, but they were effective. The evacuation will need to proceed in stages, Lieutenant Ko said, showing them a preliminary timeline on her display. We will establish forward bases in the most heavily affected regions and work outward to areas with more stable conditions. But the most heavily affected regions are completely uninhabitable, Binu protested. No one can survive in those areas. No one except humans, Lieutenant Ko corrected gently. We will deploy teams to the toxic zones first. Our people can operate in conditions where others cannot, which allows us to reach populations that other rescue services would consider unreachable. As the meeting continued, Kira found herself fascinated by the human approach to problem solving. Where Villani science sought harmony and balance, human methods seemed based on the idea that any obstacle could be overcome with enough determination and the right tools. They did not try to work around problems. They went straight through them. We should inform you, Doro said carefully, that our people are quite fragile compared to your species. We evolved in very gentle conditions and do not handle environmental stress well. Understood, Lieutenant Ko replied. We have protective transport pods designed for species with different environmental tolerances. Your people will be completely shielded from any harmful conditions during the evacuation process. She showed them images of the transport pods, which looked like miniature spacecraft designed to maintain perfect life support, even in the vacuum of space. The humans had clearly dealt with fragile alien species before, and had developed technology specifically to protect them. How do you know so much about evacuation procedures? Kira asked. Has your species had to evacuate your own worlds before? Lieutenant Ko was quiet for a moment before answering. Earth itself went through an ecological collapse about 300 years ago. We had to evacuate large portions of our population to orbital stations and colony worlds. We learned that when your world is dying, you do whatever it takes to save your people. And you survived, Commander Binu said, understanding beginning to dawn in his voice. We survived, Sergeant Shin confirmed, and we learned that the most important thing is not to let anyone face extinction alone. When we received your distress call, we knew we had to respond, because we remember what it felt like when our world was ending and no one came to help us. The humans had come not as mighty saviors looking to gain glory from their rescue, but as fellow survivors who remembered their own darkest hour. They understood what the Villani were experiencing, because they had lived through it themselves. As the meeting concluded and the humans prepared to return to their shuttle, Kira felt something she had not experienced in months: genuine hope. These Death World natives, these persistent predators from a planet of nightmares, did not see the salvation of her people as impossible. They saw it as necessary. We will begin full evacuation operations tomorrow, Lieutenant Ko said as she packed her equipment. Please have your population centers prepare for transport. We will get your people to safety. Watching the human shuttle lift off through the toxic storm, Kira realized that sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the people who looked most dangerous were the ones most willing to risk everything to help others survive. The human evacuation plan unfolded over the next week with a precision that amazed the Villani leadership. Captain Hyon Park coordinated with 3 additional vessels that had arrived from human space: the destroyer Sol, the transport carrier Busan, and the heavy freighter Incheon. Each ship brought specialized equipment and crews trained for different aspects of large-scale rescue operations. Commander Minho, Lee of the Sol, explained the strategy to the bewildered Villani Council during a video conference. His ship's role was to establish forward operating bases in the most toxic regions of Kalos Prime, places where the environmental collapse had progressed so far that even the Villani could not survive there anymore. "Your people are fragile by galactic standards," Commander Lee stated with clinical honesty. "This is not an insult, simply a biological fact. Our people are adapted to harsh conditions. We can operate where others cannot." Kira watched the tactical displays as human teams prepared to deploy into regions that their own environmental monitors had marked as instantly lethal. The radiation levels alone should have killed any living creature within hours. The atmospheric toxicity was beyond anything most known species could survive, even with protective equipment. "How can your people work in those conditions?" Doro asked, studying the environmental readings with disbelief. "Evolution and technology," replied Captain Soman, Choi of the transport carrier Busan. "Humans developed natural resistance to many environmental hazards during our evolution on Earth. Our equipment is designed to handle extreme conditions because our homeworld taught us that extreme conditions are normal." The first evacuation began in the southern continent, where the ecological collapse had advanced furthest. Kira monitored the operation from the orbital station, watching in amazement as human teams moved through acid rain and navigating terrain that was literally dissolving beneath their feet. Lieutenant Jinho Nam led one of the ground teams, coordinating the evacuation of a Villani settlement that had been considered unreachable by their own rescue services. The settlement was surrounded by toxic gas clouds and unstable ground that shifted constantly as the underlying rock structure failed. "Team 7 has reached the settlement," came Lieutenant Nam's report over the communication system. "Beginning extraction of civilian population. Environmental conditions are within acceptable limits for standard operations." Acceptable limits. The same phrase the humans kept using to describe conditions that would kill most galactic species within minutes. Kira was beginning to understand that humanity's definition of acceptable was very different from everyone else's. The evacuation process revealed the true scope of human preparation for disaster relief. Each Villani civilian was placed in a protective transport pod that maintained perfect life support and shielding from environmental hazards. The pods were loaded onto shuttles that could fly through conditions no other species would dare to enter. "We have been planning for operations like this since our own world nearly died," explained Sergeant Wanho Park as he worked alongside Villani engineer Nara to modify their delicate sensors for use on human ships. "Every colony world we establish has emergency evacuation protocols. Every ship we build can be converted for refugee transport if needed." Nara found herself fascinated by human engineering principles. Their technology was crude by Villani standards, built with thick armor and redundant systems that seemed wasteful and inefficient. But as she watched it operate in the toxic environment of her dying world, she began to understand the logic behind it. "Your equipment is designed to keep working even when damaged," she observed as Sergeant Park showed her the internal components of a sensor array that had been partially dissolved by acid rain but still functioned perfectly. "On Earth, equipment that breaks when conditions get rough is equipment that gets people killed," he replied. "We learn to build things that survive no matter what happens to them." This philosophy extended to every aspect of the human operation. Their ships were overbuilt and overpowered, designed to operate in conditions far worse than what they were encountering. Their personnel were trained for scenarios that other species considered impossible survival situations. Their logistics systems assumed that everything would go wrong and planned accordingly. As more ships arrived from human space, Kira began to see the true scale of what humanity had committed to their rescue. Vessels with names like Daegu, Gwangju, and Ulsan brought additional transport capacity and specialized equipment. Each ship carried crews who treated interstellar refugee operations as standard procedure rather than extraordinary heroism. How many rescue operations has your species conducted? Commander Binu asked Captain Park during one of their coordination meetings. Since the establishment of the human rescue fleet 60 years ago, we have responded to 47 extinction-level emergencies across 12 sectors of space, Captain Park replied, consulting his records. Total populations relocated, approximately 23 million individuals of various species. 23 million people saved from certain death. The number was staggering. But Captain Park spoke of it as simple historical fact rather than an achievement worthy of celebration. The cultural exchange that developed during the evacuation process revealed fundamental differences in how humans and other species approached survival. The Villani had always sought to maintain harmony with their environment, to find peaceful solutions that allowed everyone to coexist. When their world began to die, they had looked to others for salvation through diplomacy and appeals to compassion. The humans had learned different lessons from their history. When their world had nearly died, no one had come to save them. They had been forced to save themselves through determination, technology, and an absolute refusal to accept extinction as acceptable. This experience had taught them that survival was something you earned through preparation and action, not something you received as a gift from others. We help because we know what it is like to face the end alone, Emergency Coordinator Ji-hoon Ko explained to Kira during a quiet moment between evacuation flights. When Earth's climate collapsed 3 centuries ago, we sent out distress signals just like you did. The response we received was the same: sympathy, scientific interest, philosophical discussions about accepting fate. But no ships came. How did you survive without outside help? Kira asked. We learned that if you want to live, you have to fight for every day of existence, Ji-hoon replied. We developed technology to survive in the ruins of our world. We established colonies on planets that other species considered uninhabitable. We became very good at living in places where living should be impossible. This explained why the humans had responded to the Villani distress call when no one else would. They had not come seeking glory or gratitude. They had come because they remembered what it felt like to watch their world die while the galaxy civilized. Species offered nothing but empty sympathy. The evacuation continued with mechanical precision as human teams worked through regions that grew progressively more dangerous. They established temporary shelters in areas where the very air was poison, set up transportation hubs where the ground was unstable and dissolving, and maintained perfect safety records in conditions that should have been impossible to survive. Your people treat disaster as if it were just another work assignment, observed Doro as he watched human crews calmly preparing for their next mission into a region where volcanic activity had made the atmosphere corrosive enough to dissolve metal. Because for us, it is just another work assignment, replied Captain Park. When you grow up on a world that tries to kill you every day, you learn that disaster is normal. You learn that survival is not about avoiding danger, but about being prepared to face it and win. As the first month of evacuation operations concluded, over 400,000 Villani had been relocated to temporary shelters on the human ships. The operation was proceeding ahead of schedule despite environmental conditions that continued to worsen daily. But the most significant change was not in the numbers of people saved. It was in the growing understanding between 2 very different species. The Villani were learning that strength could come from surviving hardship rather than avoiding it. The humans were discovering that their harsh experiences, rather than making them outcasts among civilized species, made them uniquely qualified to help others in their darkest hours. The Death World natives and their fragile alien charges were becoming something unexpected, a partnership forged in the crucible of shared crisis, proving that sometimes the most unlikely allies were exactly what the universe needed. 2 months into the evacuation, Emergency Coordinator Ji-hoon Ko made a decision that changed everything. He opened the restricted Earth historical archives to the Villani leadership, granting them access to records that few non-humans had ever been allowed to see. Kira stood in the data center aboard the transport ship Busan, watching holographic displays show the true history of humanity's survival. What she saw made her understand why these Death World natives had traveled across the galaxy to help complete strangers. The Great Pacific Collapse happened in 2387, Ji-hoon explained as images of Earth's dying oceans filled the display. Rising temperatures and chemical pollution created massive dead zones that destroyed most marine ecosystems. 3 billion people depended on those oceans for food and fresh water. The recording showed human cities flooding as sea levels rose and weather patterns became chaotic. Massive storms, more violent than anything on Kalos Prime, battered coastal regions while inland areas turned to desert. It was environmental collapse on a scale that dwarfed what the Villani were experiencing. How did your people survive something like that? Doro asked, his voice filled with awe and horror. We learned to live in the ruins, Jihoon replied simply. We developed technology to clean poisoned water, to grow food in toxic soil, to build cities that could survive any storm. We had no choice but to adapt or die. The historical records continued with the Siberian extinction event, when volcanic activity released massive amounts of toxic gas into the atmosphere. Then came the Australian firestorms, continent-sized wildfires that burned for decades and changed the global climate permanently. Each disaster had pushed humanity closer to extinction, and each time they had found ways to survive and rebuild. Every catastrophe taught us something new. Jihoon continued as the displays showed human colonies being established on worlds that other species considered uninhabitable. We learned that survival meant being prepared for anything. We learned that safety was something you created, not something you were given. Commander Binu studied recordings of human rescue operations on other worlds, watching teams work in conditions that made Kalos Prime's environmental collapse look mild by comparison. Your people have been doing this for a long time. Since we reached the stars and discovered we were not the only ones who faced extinction, Jihoon confirmed. We found species after species dealing with disasters they could not handle alone, and we remembered what it felt like when no one came to help us. Captain Park joined them in the data center, his scarred face showing the weight of countless rescue missions. The galaxy is full of advanced civilizations that have never faced real hardship, he said quietly. They build beautiful cities on perfect worlds and create elegant technologies for peaceful purposes. But when disaster strikes, they do not know how to respond. Because they never had to learn, Kira said, beginning to understand. Exactly. We learned because we had no choice. Every human world was colonized by people who knew that their new home might try to kill them. Every human ship was built by engineers who assumed they would need to survive the impossible. Every human rescue team was trained by people who had lived through their own apocalypse. The truth was becoming clear to the Villani leadership. Humanity had not responded to their distress call out of kindness or duty. They had responded because they recognized the situation. They knew exactly what it meant to watch your world die, while the galaxy's civilized species offered nothing but sympathy and empty words. As Jihoon continued showing them historical records, a pattern emerged that made Kira feel both grateful and angry. The same species that had refused to help the Villani had also refused to help humanity during their darkest hours. The Helix Confederation had sent scientific observers to study Earth's collapse, but no rescue ships. The Zenth Empire had provided detailed research papers about climate change, but no sanctuary for refugees. The Crystalline Assembly had offered philosophical guidance about accepting extinction, but no practical assistance. They watched your world nearly die and did nothing, Doro said, his voice filled with disgust. They did what they always do, Captain Park replied without bitterness. They expressed sympathy and moved on with their comfortable lives. That is why we created the Human Rescue Fleet. Someone needed to be willing to actually help when civilizations face extinction. The revelation that followed was even more shocking. Doro had been conducting research into the environmental collapse on Kalos Prime, trying to understand its root causes. What he discovered made him call an emergency meeting of the combined human and Villani leadership. The toxic storms that are destroying our world are not natural, he announced to the stunned gathering. They are the result of environmental weapons deployed during a resource conflict 2 centuries ago. The data he presented was unmistakable. Orbital bombardment using atmospheric converters had been used to make large portions of Kalos Prime uninhabitable during a war over mining rights. The weapons had been designed to create long-term environmental damage that would drive away the native population. Who deployed these weapons? Commander Binu asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected the answer. A joint operation by the Helix Confederation and the Zenth Empire, Doro replied quietly. They wanted access to our rare mineral deposits but considered direct conquest too politically costly. Environmental warfare was deemed more acceptable by galactic law. The silence that followed was deafening. The same civilized species that had refused to help evacuate the Villani were the ones responsible for creating the disaster in the first place. They had poisoned Kalos Prime to steal its resources, then abandoned the native population to die when the environmental damage proved more severe than expected. They caused our extinction and then refused to help us escape it, Kira said, her voice shaking with anger. They did to you what they did to us, Captain Park replied grimly. They watched you suffer the consequences of their actions and offered nothing but empty words when you asked for help. This revelation transformed the relationship between humans and Villani from rescue operation to shared cause. Both species had been abandoned by the galaxy's so-called civilized races. Both had learned that survival meant relying on your own strength rather than the compassion of others. Why do you still help them? Binu asked, referring to the other species in human rescue records. Why save people who belong to civilizations that left you to die? Ji-Hoon Ko answered with the wisdom earned from surviving countless disasters. Because the people who need saving are not the same people who make the political decisions. Because choosing who deserves help based on the actions of their governments makes us no better than those who refuse to help us. And because, Captain Park added, we learned that surviving hardship does not make you bitter unless you choose to let it. We chose to let our scars make us stronger, not crueler. The evacuation continued with renewed urgency as both species worked together with the understanding that they were fighting against more than just environmental collapse. They were proving that the galaxy's forgotten and abandoned could save themselves and each other, without help from the civilizations that had written them off. As the last transports prepared to leave Kalos Prime's dying surface, Kira looked back at her homeworld one final time. The beautiful crystal cities of her childhood were gone forever, destroyed by weapons deployed by species that called themselves civilized. But something new was being born from the ruins, a partnership between survivors who understood that true strength came not from avoiding hardship, but from refusing to let hardship destroy your capacity to help others. The Death World natives had kept their promise. They had come when no one else would. They had saved a species that the galaxy had considered already dead. And in doing so, they had proven that sometimes the most unlikely heroes were exactly who the universe needed. 6 months after the last transport ship left the dying world of Kalos Prime, Kira stood on the observation deck of New Kalos Station and watched the sun rise over her people's new home. The world below was nothing like the crystal cities and glowing forests of their birth planet, but it was alive and growing stronger every day. New Kalos was one of 3 worlds within human space that had been selected for Villani resettlement. Each world had been chosen not for its beauty or comfort, but for its ability to support Villani biology while teaching them the skills they would need to survive in a dangerous universe. The dome cities that housed the majority of the population were built using human engineering principles, functional, durable, and designed to survive whatever disasters might come. The morning atmospheric readings look good, reported Nara, who had become the chief liaison between Villani settlers and human engineers. Her work had evolved far beyond simple translation. She had learned to think like a human engineer, planning for problems that might never occur but preparing for them anyway. The integration process had been remarkable in ways that surprised both species. Villani biotechnology had revolutionized human medical science, providing treatments for genetic diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. Meanwhile, human engineering had given the Villani tools to make any world habitable, technologies that would ensure they never again faced extinction from environmental collapse. Kira's new role as Director of Interspecies Relations kept her busy coordinating between the growing Villani settlements and the human worlds that surrounded them. She had learned to speak fluent human-style basic, with its efficient phrases and direct communication. More importantly, she had learned to think like a human when facing problems, identify the obstacle, develop solutions, and implement them without waiting for perfect conditions. We have received another distress signal, announced Admiral Hyun Park, who had been promoted to command the expanded human rescue fleet. The fleet now included both human and Villani vessels, staffed by crews who understood that true civilization was measured not by comfort, but by willingness to help others. The signal came from the Outer Rim territories, where a species called the Jorak faced extinction from a plague that their medical science could not cure. Their message was familiar in its desperation and its plea for help from anyone who might listen. The Confederation has already declined to assist, Admiral Park reported to the Joint Command Council. They cite medical contamination protocols and the expense of developing treatments for unknown pathogens. The Empire sent research teams to study the plague, but no medical supplies. Commander Binu, now serving as the Volani military representative, reviewed the tactical situation with practiced efficiency. Standard response from the civilized races: study the problem, express sympathy, avoid actual responsibility. The response preparation took only hours rather than days. The human rescue fleet had learned to move quickly when lives were at stake, and the addition of Volani biotechnology had expanded their capabilities dramatically. Medical ships equipped with advanced treatment facilities launched alongside traditional rescue vessels, carrying cures developed through the combination of human persistence and Volani scientific elegance. Kira found herself aboard the flagship Sol as the fleet prepared for hyperspace jump. Working beside her was Dr. Soman Choi, a human physician who had spent years studying Volani biological techniques, and Healer Minji, a Volani medical specialist who had learned to think like a human combat medic when treating patients in crisis situations. The Jorak physiology is similar to early human baseline, Dr. Choi reported as they reviewed medical data transmitted with the distress call. The plague appears to be an engineered biological weapon, similar to what we have encountered in 3 previous rescue operations. Healer Minji studied the pathogen analysis with growing anger. This is deliberate genocide masked as natural disaster. Someone created this plague specifically to target Jorak biology. The pattern was becoming depressingly familiar. Advanced civilizations would identify worlds with valuable resources, then deploy weapons designed to eliminate or weaken native populations without technically violating galactic law. Environmental weapons, biological plagues, atmospheric poisoning, all methods that allowed the attackers to claim they were responding to natural disasters rather than committing deliberate extermination. We will save who we can and investigate the source later. Admiral Park decided with the calm authority of someone who had seen this scenario too many times. Standard rescue protocol applies. The fleet emerged from hyperspace near Jorak Prime to find a world in the final stages of civilizational collapse. Cities lay empty as the plague spread through the population, killing 90% of those infected. The surviving Jorak had retreated to isolated settlements, waiting for death to find them, but death had not found them. Instead, ships from the human rescue fleet descended through their atmosphere, carrying teams trained to work in contaminated environments and equipped with medical technology that combined the best of 2 species knowledge. Lieutenant Jinho Nam led the first medical team to the surface, working alongside Volani biotechnicians who could analyze and counter the plague's effects in real time. The treatment they developed was crude but effective, combining human brute force pharmacology with Volani precision biological manipulation. "We can save them," reported Dr. Choi after the first day of operations. "The plague is engineered but not perfectly designed. It has weaknesses we can exploit." The rescue operation proceeded with the mechanical efficiency that had become the hallmark of human Volani cooperation. Medical teams worked in the most contaminated areas, while evacuation crews moved the healthy population to temporary shelters on the rescue ships. Within weeks, the plague was contained and treatments were being distributed planet-wide. But the most significant development was political rather than medical. The Jorak leadership, faced with the reality of who had actually helped them versus who had offered empty sympathy, requested membership in what was becoming known as the Survivor Alliance. "We do not seek conquest or expansion," Admiral Park explained to the Galactic Council during the formal presentation of their findings about the Jorak plague. "We seek to ensure that no species faces extinction alone, while others watch and do nothing." The evidence they presented was devastating. The plague had been created in Confederation laboratories and deployed by Empire military units as part of a resource acquisition strategy. The same civilized races that had refused to help cure the plague were the ones who had created it in the first place. Council representatives from various species shifted uncomfortably as Admiral Park continued his presentation, showing records of similar weapons deployed against dozens of worlds over the past 2 centuries. The pattern was clear: identify valuable resources, eliminate native populations through plausible deniability weapons, then move in to claim the resources while expressing regret about the tragic natural disasters that had occurred. This council will establish new standards for mutual aid and disaster response, declared Kira, now serving as the Survivor Alliance's primary diplomatic representative. No longer will civilized species be allowed to ignore extinction-level emergencies, while privately benefiting from them. The establishment of these new standards faced significant resistance from the traditional galactic powers, but the Alliance had advantages that could not be ignored. Human engineering expertise and Villani biotechnology had created medical and environmental solutions that the galaxy desperately needed. More importantly, they had the moral authority that came from actually helping others rather than simply talking about it. Commander Minji, formerly Healer Minji, had been promoted to lead the Alliance Medical Corps after developing treatments for 17 different engineered plagues. She stood before the Galactic Assembly and delivered words that would be remembered for generations. We have learned that true civilization is not measured by the beauty of your cities or the elegance of your technology. It is measured by your willingness to risk yourself to help others survive. By this standard, the Death World natives and their allies have proven more civilized than species that call themselves advanced. The Survivor Alliance continued to grow as more species discovered the difference between civilizations that offered sympathy and civilizations that offered salvation. Worlds that had been abandoned by the traditional galactic powers found homes within Alliance space, where harsh experience had taught the value of mutual support and practical cooperation. 2 years after the rescue of Kalos Prime, the Alliance operated the largest interstellar rescue fleet in known space. Their ships carried the simple message that had become their motto: hold position. Kira often thought about the irony that salvation had come from the galaxy's most dangerous species. The Death World natives, forged in catastrophe and tempered by loss, had proven to be the most alive to others' suffering. They had transformed their scars into strength and their hard-won wisdom into hope for others facing extinction. The crystal cities of Kalos Prime were gone forever, but something better had risen from their ruins. The Survivor Alliance stood as proof that the most unlikely heroes were often exactly who the universe needed.